In the previous video, I specifically addressed some common complaints that I see about the YA genre, or arguments that I see stating that YA as a whole just doesn't serve a big purpose and is usually just complete garbage. And I addressed those in the previous video. Those obviously aren't all of the complaints you're going to see about YA, but they are the most common arguments that I see against YA as a whole. So today I will be talking about the general merits of YA as well as giving my overall thoughts as a whole regarding this entire argument that YA books are generally trash. The first thing that I want to say is that there are good and bad stories in any literary category that you look at. There are classics that are terrible, there are adult novels that are terrible, there are children's novels that are terrible, and there are of course YA novels that are terrible. You're going to find trash wherever you look.
You're trash, Brock.
But you are also going to find some incredible books wherever you look. There are some great children's stories and there are some great YA novels, just like there are some great fantasy novels and sci-fi novels in the adult section. I don't think that there is really a category that can be completely discounted universally as being absolute garbage. Well, there is one I can think of that's largely garbage, but that's not what this is about. And the fact that some of you probably just guessed correctly which category I'm thinking of means that there might be some truth to that argument. But I'm gonna leave that be and move on. So that's the first point that I want to bring up, is that I don't think that we can claim that any category of literature is completely and universally garbage. Making such a universal statement like that is a tall order in any context, not even just literature, but just in the world in general, saying not even just in literature, but in the world in general, saying universally, this is terrible, or all of these are bad, or even all of this is good. Especially when you have so much of a certain thing, saying that all of it is bad or all of it is good is just a pretty significant assumption. I try to stay away from universal statements like that unless I'm being deliberately hyperbolic. Now, my next point is going to be a little bit longer and more involved than what I just said, and that is that I believe it's really important to keep reading through school. I don't remember exactly when I stopped reading as much as I used to, but I know that it happened around the high school period. There was a period of my life where I would read tons of books, just non-stop reading. As soon as one was done, I would pick up the next one and just keep going, and that was all that I did. Obviously, things have changed for me since then. For one, I work a little more than full-time now, and then I also have all of these projects that I'm working on constantly. But on top of that, during high school, there was just a period of my life where I was reading so many textbooks that were just exhausting that I didn't really want to pick up a book as soon as I was done reading them. After you've just been poring over a study guide for 3 hours and all of these scientific terms and ideas are starting to blur together, the last thing that many of us are going to want to do after that is just go and read something else. I wanted to go and rest my eyes or do something that didn't involve my brain being so employed. So I started reading a lot less. Now, thankfully, I wasn't often made to read actual books that I really didn't want to read. There were a couple of times when I had to read classic, and I remember a couple of them definitely have stood out to me as not being great and definitely not being something that I enjoyed, but I did not have to read nearly as many books like that as some students have to do. I don't think that was a huge issue for me, but I do know that it's an issue for some. I have heard many people say that the books they were forced to read in school kind of put them off of literature and led to them not really reading any books after that. Because reading became a chore and you started to have this sort of negative view of books because you just read 10 books in a row that were exhausting and that you had to force yourself to read instead of reading something that you actually enjoyed. And that's why I think that the YA category of literature is so important, because having that literature available that is really accessible and that meets the reader where they're at is really going to help continue to keep that interest in reading alive while people are being forced to read books that they really don't want to, whether it's an actual textbook or some sort of assignment in a literature course. Whatever the case may be, keeping that interest in reading alive and saying, hey, not all books are like this book that you're being forced to read but that you're not enjoying, can really help out with continuing that love for reading. Now, I want to point out this is really just a theory that I have, and it is based entirely on anecdotal experience. I didn't do a bunch of research for that particular point, but I have heard from many different people that they've had similar experiences, that at some point during high school and after, they lost their interest and love for reading. For me, I never stopped reading completely, but what I did start doing is I only read 2 authors that I knew were tried and true. I read Terry Pratchett and I read Brandon Sanderson, and that was all that I read. I didn't really take any risks with books. I didn't pick up books that had premises that interested me. I picked up books that I knew I'm gonna enjoy this because I love the author, and that was all that I did. Now that I'm taking more risks, I'm finding more stories that I'm enjoying quite a bit more. I never would have read, for example, Dark Age by Pierce Brown, or Rage of Dragons or Fires of Vengeance Vengeance, all of which are stories that I really enjoyed and that I'm glad I've read, but that unless I had made myself start reading those things last year when I wanted to branch out more, I never would have picked those up. I would have just kept reading Terry Pratchett and Brandon Sanderson and called it good.
It's a very weird thing.
To that same point, I want to remark that easy books are a good thing. You're not supposed to struggle through every single book that you read. Not every book is supposed to take an hour per page. I've made this joke a few times on the channel where I mimic somebody who is saying things like that, because that is an argument I've legitimately heard, that you're not really reading unless you are struggling through the book. If the book is not hard to grasp, then it's not a book that was worth reading. That is an argument I see often, and unfortunately, at least most of the time, those people aren't joking. But I would argue the inverse, that a book that is easy to read is a good thing. I think that you should challenge yourself with what you're reading every now and then, but at the same time, I often intermix challenging books and easy ones. After a long stint of reading a bunch of harder novels, I will pick up a really easy one that I think I can finish in 1 or 2 days. Usually, novels like that are contemporary, and even more often, the really easy ones are gonna be YA novels. Not because they're written for somebody who's 10 years old or something like that, but because they are extremely accessible, and they aren't written in this sort of highbrow manner that some people come to think means that a book is worth reading. So should every book that you read be super easy? In my opinion, you should challenge yourself every once in a while. But if you don't, and you just want to read stuff that's easy, that is totally fine too. And if you're enjoying yourself and nobody's getting hurt, who cares?
So nobody cares. Nice hat.
Easy books are a good thing, and they definitely have their place in the world, just like challenging books do. Another reason that I believe the YA category is important and something that we need to stop just shaming is that YA authors have the opportunity to make a positive impact on their readers during a crucial time in their life. I remember when I was that young, I did not want to hear what anyone had to say about how I should live my life or how the world works, because I was pretty confident I had it figured out and everyone else was just wrong. But I would also take lessons away from stories. Sometimes those lessons were the same thing that the people in my life were trying to tell me, but I didn't want to hear it from people in my life because I wanted to be a rebellious teenager. Eventually, I outgrew that stage of my life, and I don't think that everybody is that way, but for some people who don't want to listen to the people around them, there's an opportunity for those who are reaching them through stories, whether it's a video game or a book or a movie, TV show, what have you. If you are reaching that audience, there's a chance for you to have a positive impact on that person's life. To say things like, I know what you're going through, or here's how you should approach the situation, or here's the mentally healthy behavior that you should be exhibiting in the circumstances that you're in right now. Of course, as I mentioned in the previous video, I know that the inverse can happen very often, where unhealthy behaviors are promoted and glorified in those books. Now, I'm very specific as well when I say that those behaviors are being glorified in those books, because I don't think it's wrong to have horrible things happen in books, or to have horrible characters, or have horrible characters do horrible things. My problem is when those horrible actions are treated as a good thing, or are encouraged, or have a spotlight shone on them and said, this is the good thing, this is fine, this is something that you should strive for. And that happens a lot in YA novels, because instead of just meeting them where they're at but trying to have a positive change, some authors are just meeting them where they're at and then giving them what they want so that they can sell more books. And that is definitely something that I have a problem with. I acknowledge that it happens, but it doesn't happen all the time. And I still think the YA category is important because it has an opportunity to have a positive impact on its reader base. Additionally, those books can have discussions that the audience needs to have but doesn't feel comfortable having. It can talk about all sorts of things that people in that age group are likely struggling with, but that one, a lot of adults don't think they're struggling with, or two, a lot of adults think that they shouldn't be reading about at all. There are all sorts of problems that people face, and then we have all of these activist groups out there who are trying to keep that sort of stuff out of their hands and trying to treat them like children and coddle them as if they, one, aren't already in the real world, or two, aren't about to be thrust into that real world completely alone in just a couple of years. Seriously, you hit 18 really quickly, and then many of us are out on our own at that point. And you are not prepared for that if you've been coddled the entire time. And if your parents are coddling you, or society is coddling you, your school is coddling you, everyone around you is not talking to you about these things, there is one more chance for the stories that you are involved in, not just books, but video games, movies, shows, whatever, all of those, to try to have a positive impact and discuss these things in a way that is going to have a good impact on whoever is consuming the story. So what is my final verdict with all of the points that I brought up in the previous video and this video? Well, ultimately, YA is a category that is extremely important. In fact, I would argue that it is one of the most important categories out there. It is a great bridge to reading adult novels, but if you don't ever get to the other side of the bridge and you just hang out in the middle, that's perfectly acceptable too. There are definitely problems with YA that I believe need to be addressed, especially the YA novels that are having negative impacts on people and that are glorifying things that are truly awful, but there are also plenty of YA books out there that can have a a positive impact or that people can pull great lessons from. I think that if you are someone who has been reading a lot of YA and nothing else, there's a good chance that you may find something that you like in the adult section. But if you're genuinely never interested in any of that and you just want to keep reading that age category because it's a comfort read for you and that's why you read, that is totally fine too. I don't think it doesn't count as reading just because you're enjoying it. I think that's ridiculous. So YA is important, and I would argue even critical, but there are definitely some problems in the literary world that need to be resolved, especially when it comes to how authors are targeting young adult audiences, or not just authors, but the publishing houses as well. Overall, YA is something that is very important and that I think is one of the most critical categories of literature out there, but there are definitely some problems that need to be resolved within it. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out this video. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to see another video from me, you can do so by clicking up here. And until next time, bye.